So, as I said, it's a very special event. We're in the hands of two truly literary sensations. I can sense the excitement here. So without further ado, will you please join me in welcoming Sally Rooney and Patricia Lockwood.
Thank you all for being here this evening. Can people hear me okay? Yeah, great. It's my privilege to introduce Patricia Lockwood, who, as I'm sure you all know, is an American poet and author. Her first poetry collection, Building the Pop Outlaw Black, was published in 2012 and became one of the best-selling independently published poetry collections ever. Her second collection, Motherland, Fatherland, Homeland Sexuals, was published 2 years later and named a notable book by the New York Times. Her memoir, Priest Daddy, chronicling her family life as the daughter of a married Catholic priest, was included in innumerable Book of the Year roundups in 2017 and won the Thurber Prize for American Humor. I have been a devoted fan of Patricia's work for years, and it's a huge delight for me to be here this evening and to introduce her. So I think we're going to begin with the reading, and then I have some questions, and then we're going to let you guys ask some questions at the end if that suits everyone. Cool, so Patricia, would you like to read for us?
Yeah, let's do it. Where did that mic go? Is it on? It's on.
The ode on a Grecian urn is worth any number of old ladies. A grandmother hung from a cliff like a tense moment in an action movie, and the ode, speaking itself with its hand on one heart, steadfastly refused to save her. In fact, it did that thing where it ground each finger out with a motorcycle boot and then ate its cigarette for emphasis, whooping. Some old-ass bitch was in Pussy Church when the ode, now spelling itself with an umlaut, swung its urn in the back of her head, really clocking her, till the violets in her church hat grew from the floor and won a third-place prize for consciousness. The ode is pushing nanas off bridges, detonating them with dynamite, tying them to railroad tracks with squeaky young rope, pouring big lugs into them out of the skull and crossbones bottle. The ode is checking its pocket watch, which points always to death to old ladies o'clock. It's shrieking, ugh, you're like 100, and your breath smells exactly like horse medicine, ho. The ode is blasting holes in them, is laying them out in the potpourri aisle, is stabbing them with those icicles they always said were dangerous. The ode means ill to all of them. The ode is worth any number. And the worst is I believe it. The worst is I will become one, without having written anything like the ode on a Grecian urn, and sit in long rows along with my kind, till there the ode comes striding toward me, my necessary death at the ready, my pulse like black grapes at its fingertips saying, fear not, it will be fast. The forgetting of great poems will fly through you in bullets. Beauty is truth, and truth. But already I'm losing it. All I know is that the world is falling away, and you won't believe what it is wearing. The ridiculous pantsuit of me, a old lady, crumpled hopelessly at the crotch, a flower valiant in its little butthole. All the vitable syllables are being erased. Its space-age fabric now seen for what it is, an embarrassment. My name is turning into Edna, Myrtle, Dorcas. My descendants find my peppermints disgusting. The urn is approaching to scatter me over a landscape that is heaven on earth. And in the feed of the poem I am running, in mad pursuit and struggle to escape, chased as if I am worth 1 million, pearl, opal, ruby, coral, until I am caught by the feeble arm, and because it is true I am telling the ode, you stood in me like a spine, put poppies behind my eyes, just the fact of you, that he took one raw spring to set you down, instead of going out to tip heifers, tweak noses, or sexually harass huge curvy vases. You were for me too, though they would trade me in all my Beulahs, have lined me up to enter that land in my turn. You let me memorize your most satiny parts and repeat them in hospital waiting rooms, first to myself, and then almost out loud, mine, mine, the world's all mine. Something to say in the face of tall sickness, as I quietly tried to unwrap hard candies, as I tugged down tissues from my sleeve, because it is true I am telling you, ode, that I had a throat and you boiled in it. And the ode is murmuring almost gently, but do you like my ending? Some people don't like my ending. I don't. I never did. I thought it was so overwrought. Though now that I'm here myself, why not? If it has to be this way, then better. Put a bright red cough on all that white. An anamorph enters the doggy-dog world. Discover the power at age 11. Discover all powers at age 11. A kitten head struggles out of your face, and the kitten head mews, milk? You gasp with its mouth and it slurps itself back. Yet the mew for milk remains. You drink it. You think, I am an anamorph. Your sight and your hearing increase, like wheat and the wind in the wheat. Well, you've never seen any wheat, but it sounds good to you in your new trembling ears. Blue sky increases above the wheat, and you know what it's like to grow up. Well, a hawk's is between two legs, but much higher. Halfway to any animal is where you like to be. Get halfway there and have just the instinct that someone's approaching. Stripes begin to form, are always a surprise. You look down, and you move your head left to right, and then the meaning comes. English get worse, but not much in your muzzle. English get worse, but not much in your mouth. You walk to school and sit next to a girl who was born with a tail, and you copy off her. You rub your temples when they ache. Rub any of your body when it aches. You seem to be only a series of places where animal parts could emerge. Soon you will be a teenager, and soon you will be so greasy, and how you can hardly wait, because its grease makes the animal graceful. And go. You go to the petting zoo with your class, and timidly reach in a hand. Turn to a donkey and finally feel your lashes are long enough. Turn to a horse and finally feel that your eyes are so meltingly human. Walk home on your own through the fields, and the increase of wheat and the wind in it. And think of the life that stretches before you. Work your way through all the animals and come to the end of them, and what? And turn to crickets and make no noise? One tear struggles out of your face, but no, that's not a tear. I fucking eat crickets, your kitten says. I fucking eat silence of crickets for fun. I got life after life, and a name like baby. Every time I try to cry a tear, a new kitten head grows out of me. And oh, how you are lifted then, the kitten head of you in the high hawk hold. The whole world gets together and gangbangs a deer. Bambi is fresh from the countryside. Bambi is fresh, and we want him on film. He doesn't even know how to kiss yet. Lean in and part your lips, we tell him, and pull a slow strip off a tree. We shine our biggest spotlight on him. Our biggest spotlight is the sun. And under the spotlight, the deer drips sweat. And what do deer like more than salt? Now look at the fawn and grow an antler. We patiently instruct him. It will grow from your thoughts like the ones in your head. Oh, Bambi, says the fawn. Oh, Bambi. Fresh grass stains around the young mouth. Every deer gets called Bambi at least once in its life. Every deer must answer to Bambi. Every deer hears don't kill Bambi. Every deer hears don't eat Bambi. Every deer hears look, oh look, it's Bambi. When the deer all died, they died genericide, of one baby name for the million of them. Then women began to be called Bambi, and then deer understand what women are like. Light shafts, with long blonde hair and long legs. The sun piercing through the Bavarian trees, and the sun touching down on the dewy green ground. Then women begin to be called fawn, and then women begin to say Bambi, oh Bambi. And their mouths are open, and they gape like a mouth when it takes a big bite of spring green. The spotlight shines down through the trees and long legs. This is the first movie most of us see. Small name for a small deer, Bambi. Sometimes he feels all the deer could fit inside him. The movie we are making is this one. All the deer and one after another. Subtitles so we know what his soft sounds are saying. Mostly he says, the meadow, the meadow. Like the women who are Bambi say, God, oh God. What they mean is a wide open space, a great clearing. All the deer and us watching in a great open field. A great wide clearing in the face of the deer says the meadow, and all of us watching. The deer's mouths moving as if they are reading. But no, they are eating the grass. Government spending. The government spent to Patricia on me. A huge waste, it lamented, when we could have been spending it on another Nixon. The government spent all its beauty on the great light leap on the deer crossing sign. There was hardly any beauty left for anything else in America. And looking around them, the government said, is there none left? Print more. You are born. You barely contain yourself. You grow. Inside you, someone spends $1 billion to make prison more luxurious. Inside you, someone spends $1 billion to keep libraries open 1 hour later. Then, oh God, you feel wonderful. You must be on welfare. The government spent its whole education on me. At least that is how it feels right now. I am bursting with educational dollars. I am bursting with other dollars as well. I'm rounded up. I'm one long row of O's. I get so many commas that the sentence doesn't stop. The dollars in me are a map of Missouri my mother can't fold back up. Oh no, the map is everywhere. But I know the way. I am hot on a trail. I am bursting with the dollars that put that knowing breath in drug dolls. All the spending of the space program is in me. The stars seem especially close. This is because they are a government handout. They are spending millions on moonlight research. When I am president, I will cut the arts and let my right arm flow downhill. I am ready. There is nothing trivial about me left. I am eliminating the penny every second. A dollar is peeled off a roll of thousands. It is the day. The mint of it is in my mouth. I open it, completely fresh.
That thing was so freaking hot.
I was like, oh, I can do this. This is normal. A man does this every week. It's really hot, you guys. Also, I'm wearing a normal outfit. I thought maybe, she's like, they'll just think that it's some architectural gown that you've chosen and no one will be rude about it, and they'll just accept you as you are, but...
I thought it looked strikingly normal.
Thank you!
I just thought
How
it
is
was
this different? It's
very
almost like
normal.
a Fräulein Maria outfit underneath.
Yeah, very plain.
But yeah, I don't think it improves poetry. It was an experiment. I was like, maybe it'll be great. No.
It was
We won't be
great.
doing that again. No,
It was
well,
great.
I don't think it improves it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always great.
It's great.
Fair enough.
Thank you for your introduction.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Yes, and for having me here tonight at the Pepper Canister Church.
I want to ask you about an essay you wrote called, I don't know if describing it as an essay might be wrong, I think it was originally given as a lecture, called How Do We Write Now?
Yes.
Yeah, from last year. That's from last year, 2018.
It is, yes, and it technically is a lecture. It came about this way. I was asked to give a class, and since I haven't ever been to school, and I haven't really been to a class of that kind, I'm like, shit, what do I do? So on the airplane, I was like, I'll write something down and just hope that it goes off okay. So that is how that came about. It was just out of sheer not knowing what happens in a classroom.
And it's fascinating because, and I encourage you all to read it because it is available on the internet, and it's about, well, I think it's about what are we as writers doing now in this moment of sort of political crisis, climate crisis, like what is the job of the writer? And reading it, I felt like there was a very affirmative answer to that. And I'm curious as to how you feel your work interacts with the political world.
Oh man. So does anyone else feel like their mind has been replaced by a phone in the last couple years? I think an essayist on Twitter wrote about, the feeling of like standing on a bridge and having his phone in his hand and wanting to throw it into the water as he previously would have wanted to jump, like a suicidal instinct, but it's replaced by wanting to throw your phone into the pond. Yeah, so that was a very optimistic lecture that was written when I had no internet access. So I got to be extremely sort of optimistic about what it would look like to wake up in the morning and not instantly begin to mainline the news, and whether it was irresponsible as an artist to try to step back and make a little clearing for your own mind or your own mind as it used to be. And of course the lecture comes to the conclusion that it is worthwhile, and I think that's the conclusion an artist always has to come to. But I don't think that I'm being particularly successful at it in this moment. Do you feel like this is a time that is particularly easy to write for you?
No, and I was, when reading your essay, you do make the case for making that clearing.
Yeah.
And I felt that was such a freeing thing to read.
Right.
But then I wasn't sure, I find it hard to make myself believe that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So do you struggle with it, or are you always as optimistic as the essay sort of argues for?
I don't even know if it's optimism. I think on the days that I am perfectly selfish and the first thing I do is wake up and I make a cup of tea and I read a real paper book, those are the days that I feel most like myself. I don't know if it's even responsible to do that anymore. Right? So I haven't come to any conclusion about that. The time that I'm the healthiest is the time when I'm the most selfish, is the time that I'm the most ignorant of the outside world. So I don't know how we're supposed to reconcile these things. I think we're all some days we might be able to make that peace for ourselves, other days not. Some days, in the United States at least, it is absolutely impossible not to be glued to the novel of the time. It's impossible to step out of it and reclaim some old sense of the narrative, because the narrative is all around us. Why would we not tap into it? This is what's happening now. It feels like we're in this big thrumming bloodstream just being carried along, but it's like, what is the body that we're actually inside? You know, what is the mind giving us these signals? Like, what are we doing right now? So I was able to be clear about it, and I was able to be idealistic about it, I think, in that piece, but that represents happiness. That's not how I feel every day. I mean, I feel like a big jangling bag of nerves. I feel like I've been poisoned through every pore of my body. Like I've been running through the Amazon, I've been like shot with 1,000 little poison darts. I don't feel good. So I don't know. I think maybe it's more difficult for novelists, right? Like if you're making something up, how do you step away from what's really going on and make up something completely? A poem is always like, sure, the sun is always going to be there, or we thought it was always going to be there for a while. So it always felt like you were being sort of responsible as a poet to step back and write about the sky every once in a while, but like, no, now it's falling. Yeah. But I think fiction is a little bit different, because it's like, all right, this is the story of the time. I am a character in the story of the time, but now I'm going to go over here and like write about this adultery thing over here. Like that it feels weird. It feels absolutely weird.
So weird. And then the question that like follows on from that is, do you feel a pressure on the work to actually respond in the work to the events that are preoccupying us in politics? Because like I was even thinking about, so many of your poems are about nature in a sort of, in a very subversive and surrealistic way. But now with climate politics and stuff, like you say, nature is no longer such an objective, like timeless entity.
Right, the obelisk that's always going to be there.
Right.
It's unmoving.
So do you feel that pressure then coming back to your work when you have made your little clearing, that the work has to respond to politics in some way? That, like, is that an impulse that you feel like a duty, or is it just something that happens organically, or you feel like it doesn't happen?
So I began, do you remember the big sort of indie explosion it was post 9/11 for us. There was, in the United States, there was this big boom of indie poetry. And a lot of factors sort of fed this, but there was tonally some similarities to all the poetry, and it was that we were totally obsessed with animals. I mean, there were foxes, there were deer, there were birds, like wildlife just ran in and out of the poems. And it began to feel, I asked myself, why? Why were there suddenly all these animals? And it was a collective anxiety, I think, that they were all going away. Sometimes you would put something in a poem that you hadn't even seen before, which is what I talk about in the Memoir poem, where I'm like, have I seen weed? I've seen something waving, and it was gold, and it was in a field. Is that what weed was? I'm not totally sure. So I felt like it was younger people, and I felt like it was part of our collective consciousness that was like, you know, these deer and these foxes and these birds were leaping through our poems to disappear elsewhere. And that started to worry me, and I started to feel maybe like I should be writing less of a surrealist or obscene pastoral, you know, to actually reflect what's going on. The line in American poetry is that political poetry is ephemeral or belongs to its time only or doesn't last. I don't think that is true of what's being written now. I don't think that I am the person who is going to write political poetry the best. I'm hideous at it. I'm like extremely bad at it. And it was because I always led a sort of monastic life. My mind was very sealed off. So I don't think that I am the person. I'm having an easier time doing it in prose.
Okay.
I think it was a lot more difficult for me in poetry, and in fact for the last couple of years I've been more silent where poetry is concerned, maybe for that reason, because what should go in? What should go in right now?
Yeah, that is definitely the big question.
Or what is the subject? Like, what are our subjects? For me, before, a poem would always get started when language got knotted up in some way. It was the language, it wasn't happenings that made me write poetry. It was always some kink that formed in the language that caught my attention. And the poem would come out from that almost as my attempt to solve the problem or unknot something or not something that seemed too smooth. But that's a personal exercise. You know, you can't guarantee that something like that is going to contain answers for everyone. Although sometimes, you know, in America, the most personal poetry tends to be the most universal, or it can be. I mean, you forget that Emily Dickinson was writing during the Civil War, and you think, bitch, put a gun in your poems. Well, she did, though. She put some guns in. But it's like, maybe, you know, mention this a little bit, and then it's like, but would we have her be the one who was like, my Civil War poem? Maybe not. Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to console ourselves right now with the idea that different writers fulfill different roles and that all of us can't do the same things. It feels cowardly to be like, oh, well, I'm one of the ones who wears a white dress over here and just like writes this little thing about a bone or something. It's like, all right, cop out. Yeah. But I think too that you can end up being disingenuous if you do try to tackle certain subjects, or even if you consider a poem to be tackling a subject at all. I think that's the wrong approach, maybe. So for me, if I go into it thinking I'm going to tackle something politically, that won't work. But if I work out something for myself that can be political, something like Rape Joke, I think, is a political poem, but it was me working something out, and it was me saying, I think that this could be a good poem. That's fundamentally selfish.
But what it points to, I guess, is that like our lives, our personal experiences are inevitably caught up in politics. So there's no way to write honestly about even personal things without like touching on a broader political.
And you don't know what will become applicable or what is useful to other people. I consider myself to be the least useful, maybe, of all writers. But it hasn't been true, I think, for other people, or other people have not seen me that way. If people do relate to something that you've written about, you didn't necessarily intend to relate it to their experience, but it happened anyway.
I'm really interested in what you say about feeling like your idea for a poem or your sort of triggering moment for a poem will have to do with language. Did you feel the same way when embarking on writing your memoir? Was that triggered by a feeling about language, or was it triggered by a feeling about this is the subject that I want to address and I'm going to have to find a way to do it?
Well, it's actually neither. That was born out of financial necessity. Absolutely.
The mother of many great books.
Yes. So at the beginning of pre-study, I do talk about this a little bit. There was a personal health crisis in my own life. And we were just wiped out, because in America you can be. I mean, something can go just a little bit wrong health-wise, and you're totally cleaned out. And the way people look at you too is like, well, that's too bad. You shouldn't have had that thing happen to you. It's this very strange dysfunction that we have. And we raised money actually for it on Twitter. And that was one of the first wave of that kind of thing. Now you see constantly like GoFundMes for medical care in America, which is just a really odd thing. Right. But I had in my back pocket this really odd fact about me, which is that my father is a married Catholic priest, which is the sort of thing that's like a really charismatic like backstory that someone can have that everyone wants to know more about. In fact, when I called it Priest Daddy, I was like, well, that will just explain everything. It did not. In fact, I think most people took it to be like a porny thing. Yeah. Not at all. Not remotely. But yeah, so I'm like, all right, I have this. This is my ace in the hole, whatever the hell that is. Is that a poker thing? What is that? I have no idea. Don't come to us to know about cards, guys. So that was my ace in the hole, and I thought, this is something I can write that actually someone might pay me money for. Yeah. So then the problem became, how do I approach this material in a way that is artistic? How do I make a good book out of this? And that was much harder than you would have expected, like to even just consider the planes of the story from different angles. And we spoke a little bit about the chapter Voice earlier. And I said, I'm going to have one chapter in this book where I do what I want. And I'm going to be totally free. And everything else can tell a story, but this will do what I want it to do. And I felt as long as I had that chapter in the book that it was all right, that I was approaching everything else in a more conventional way, because I had one space where I was myself.
And did you, I mean, the memoir is obviously deeply personal, and it's about your personal experiences, but it's also very much an account of your family, other members of your family. And there are a lot of very funny scenes in the book where you're note-taking while your family members speak, just writing down in front of them, very much in the knowledge that you are mining this for material.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
And did you, like, was that, I mean, how did you approach that? Did you ever think, like, is this an okay thing to do? Did you have to make that decision with yourself that you were okay with doing this?
Maybe I'm a sociopath, because no, I didn't. I was like, it's fine, and I'm doing this. It is a big question now, and usually the way it's phrased is this my story to tell? Which is an interesting question, and I think that you should ask yourself that if you are writing a memoir. But I think it's also we have an extremely long history of books that are not considered ethical in any way, shape, or form. It's a newer thing, maybe, in this cultural moment, to want to be a writer but also be seen as good. I don't know that I ever had any particular interest in being seen as good. You know, I've fallen away from the church. I was always bad in the eyes of my Holy Father. Like, why would I be good in society? Like, I should just go ahead and commit a murder and just like be done with it, right? Because that was not exactly the question I asked. I did certainly examine the material and think, this is not going in. I will not betray this person this way. I will not do that. This is a way I can write around this. But it was never a sort of thing where it's like, is this okay for me to do? It's like, no, it's fine.
But it was, go on. Sorry.
I think what I was going to say is that my parents, understanding as little about art as they did, and maybe this is the reason that they gave me such carte blanche. Like, if you tell my parents you're a writer, they think that it is within your province to do those things. So that was this gesture of extreme generosity to me. My father has not read the book, and that's possibly the most generous thing a person could have done. When I named the book after him, and it's all about him as well. He hasn't read it. My mom listened to the audiobooks, then it was just like I was talking to her. So it's very sweet. She is the real hero, I would say. But yeah, they think, because maybe they don't understand what it is that artists do, that they take it for granted that they just do what they want and that they're very bad as well.
The book is obviously extremely funny and has won prizes specifically for its humour.
One prize.
Well, okay, but it's also the prize of our laughter, Patricia.
The prize of our laughter.
It's a very funny book. And I'm wondering, specifically because, like, the book does have a lot of, well, it has to some extent, it contains, traumatic incidents, but always with that sense of humour intact. And actually, it's impossible to extricate the two, as a reader anyway, to extricate the relation of very difficult, traumatic, sad experiences from that humour which is so singular to your voice and which is so you. And I wonder about the relationship that you feel as a writer between your savagely funny sense of humour, but also your ability to write about very difficult subject matters.
Yes. So this is a replication of my household, which you could say has a tone problem. So this is how it works. We'll be having some sort of riotous conversation. My dad will come in the door and he'll like lift his big dress off his head and he'll tell us some absolutely atrocious, heinous story about, a tragedy or something. The dinner table conversation is like about pedophiles. It is never the case in my family that a certain tone is kept to itself. It all mixes together. So you can be joking one minute and the next minute it's like, well, this bishop did this, or this happened here, this person threw herself under a train. There's an outrageousness, or a very heightened sense of the tone my family uses. And maybe it's because when you are dealing with those really life and death things, I mean, some black sense of humor goes along with that. But that is the tone of my household. Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah, that's great.
And sort of the sense of humor is what my siblings and I developed, and my mom, sort of tiptoeing around my father. So anyone here who had an angry father, or an angry mother as well, you sort of know how it is. The family moves around that person. You don't know what to expect from them. You ally yourself against that person, and you develop a language to talk about them that they don't understand. So that was part of it as well. That was something that we all did together. That was a little bit against my father, that I think he also understood we were doing, but we were allowed to do.
It was a sort of self-protective, community protective strategy.
Yes.
And that makes me wonder about, there's a line at the very end of the poem Rape Joke, where the narrator says, come on, that's a little bit funny, admit it. And it is funny, but there's something other than just humor in that. It's like a confrontation. It's like I dare you to laugh at what you've just read. Right. And in that sense, the humor seems to be doing something other than just making the reader laugh. It's also like, it's like, you can't feel sorry for me because I actually think it's funny kind of gesture. Right. That there's something else encoded in the humor there.
Yes. And when I wrote that poem, I didn't feel that it was so angry, really. And I thought the end was a good turn.
Oh, it's such a good
It's a good turn. I'm interested in good turns. I'm, less invested in seeing what is emotionally behind them sometimes. I didn't understand what that poem was until I read it out loud. And I was like, oh shit. It was extremely combative. It was a very confrontational poem. Like, you didn't hear a sound the whole time I read. Just everyone's eyes and ears were just pinned to this event, this reading, and by the end, when you say those lines, you could just hear a pin drop, and I did not understand that maybe I was so particularly angry about the fact that now I would be seen that way.
Yeah.
So you can know these things. I mean, writing Rape Joke, I knew those things. I knew that it's included in the poem. I say that, like, this is what you're going to think about now. This is what you're going to attach to me. But at the end comes the anger because of that. And it's not something I had to tell. I mean, it's I could have kept it to myself, but why? And so then, the turn at the end is really like, this changes me in your eyes, and why? I think that is where the anger is.
And I remember reading the poem first in the context of this, like, very boring, idiotic debate that was happening about...
Yeah! Was it like Daniel Tosh or something? It's so stupid!
Yes, and so that's how I first encountered it. This, like, debate about, has PC gone mad? Can we even make jokes about rape anymore? And it was like,
can't we even make jokes about rape?
Like, what's wrong with our society? And your poem was like just the perfect intervention in that horrible, arid debate.
Yeah, it felt that way.
But it also made it funny, which almost seemed to subvert the whole thing.
And that's what I'm interested in. But it's also true sometimes. I don't know, maybe I have a little bit of a combative performing style anyway, because sometimes I'll write something and it seems totally normal and I'll get up to perform and be like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm being a total bitch to these people and I have no idea why. So it's something I think in myself, and I think it's something that's also true of my father. So my dad gets up at my grandmother's funeral and he's like, well, you're all here because you're doing the right thing. You know, most people these days just bury their parents in the backyard like pets. And we're like, first of all, and B, if we're the people who are doing the right thing by burying her in the regular ground, why are you yelling at us, dude? It's just so weird. But it must be, I think it must be some sort of like rhetorical bent that I learned from him, because I get up there and I'm like, oh, really? What is that? I have no idea. You have a little bit of it too.
Oh yeah, it's very definitely like a very combative way of using humor. Like, yeah.
Or maybe humor is more like argument to us, or I don't know. I apply humor to things. You know, in just regular conversation, it's trivial, it's decorative, but I think in rhetoric I apply it towards certain ends.
And it can be aggressive, but then it can also have, there's a lot, I mean, it can do a lot for you.
Yes.
It does. Yeah. I also want to ask about...
do you believe that I never opened my Red Bull?
Oh, yeah, we were going to do that at the start.
Yes.
Well, here we are.
Yeah.
You want to...
Yeah, I'll crack it.
Okay.
I'll do a little performance.
That's good. Because we dropped it earlier, so I was afraid it would leak, but it was fine. I want to ask about gender, and I guess this is related to what we've been talking about Rape Joke and also talking about politics. And there's for me, an extremely moving section in pre-study where you're saying, I did sometimes feel I did not make it out. Like I did not make it through these experiences, and connecting that specific feeling to the experiences that women undergo in a patriarchal society. And it's a moment of shade and darkness in a otherwise a book that can be very bright and light and optimistic. And I mean, I think one of the book's strengths is its ability to dwell in both those places and to have that ambivalence. And I wondered, I guess I'm just curious to ask about that sense of not having made it out and yet being able to write at the same time, being able to give this account.
You could tell that paragraph is really important to me because I rewrote it like 500 times, and I still don't feel like I totally got it right. It wasn't quite there, but it was one of the most important paragraphs in the book to me because that felt really true. Like, this seems like a free expression, or the things that I write in my poems seem like I put no restriction on what I say or what I do or anything like that, but inside I'm extremely childlike, I think, and I'm a naturally frightened person. And my mom is a frightened person. My father is a person who says whatever he wants. I got both things. So that means that I get to say whatever I want and then feel frightened about it later, which is just like horrible. It's the worst of both worlds. But I don't know. I mean, I don't feel, and I've talked about this before, I don't feel like very gendered, very female. I don't feel, to me, like wearing dresses is funny to me. It's like kind of a private joke. It doesn't really feel like something that I need to be doing for my gender expression. So I have always felt pretty much strictly split between like the male and female parts of my personality. But why to me is the frightened part the female part, and the part that is so expressive the male?
I'm curious to hear you say that you have both sides, the ability to say whatever you want, but then also the ability to feel anxious about it. Because that to me is such an internet feeling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I know.
We're seeing everything. We're like posting butthole pics on there. It's insane.
But I'm so curious to get your read on that because you are like an internet person.
Internet person. I'm very I've uploaded my body.
You're
I'm
on
a hologram. I'm not even here. Yeah, I'm completely online.
Yeah, and how do you feel about being so extremely online and yet also having that sense of the fear that you describe? Because to me, I get that fear about the internet. The internet gives me that fear. But
it's weird. You're saying this, and I'm realizing for the first time that I don't have that fear with the internet.
Oh.
To me, it's a totally vocal space. I experience no ramifications. Maybe I should. No, that's the place where I don't have a body, and so I'm not frightened of anything. Weird.
And do you feel then that the way that the language is used on the internet, I feel like the way language is used on the internet has been very influential for me when I...
Totally. Yes.
And then do you think that has something to do with, as you say, the fact that we don't have a body on the internet? That it's like sort of like uncorporeal use of language because we're not there, we're not physically present.
And I think that is what enables us to be so horrible to each other. And we know that. We know that that's like why people are so absolutely awful in comment sections. Or even the force of language itself can draw you into an argument that you don't necessarily want to be in. The few times, I pride myself on never getting mad online. You almost cannot make me mad online. I had a super ragey dad. It's not going to happen. You're not going to draw me in. But the few times that I've gotten drawn into something that I didn't want to partake in, it's almost as if the language itself became compulsory. Like there was something unschooling in the internet itself that was like drawing me into it, that was its own language. And it was an argument that the internet wanted to have, and it was like using me as a vessel. Yeah. Those are the times that I have felt strange. For the rest of it, I think maybe it's like that for a lot of like queer people, non-binary people, just like introverts, sort of, people who are like K-holed in their own minds. I think that is like a place that we are really comfortable. And there's also something defiant about it. Because for me, it was something I discovered myself. There was a computer in my home, but I figured out what to do with it, okay? Like, I'm going in the chat rooms. You don't know what's going on after 9 o'clock, Dad and Mom, because I'm doing whatever I want and like whatever the hell it was. It was just like Yahoo chat rooms at that time. This was old school. Yeah, so it was a place that I discovered for myself, so there was no censure there. I felt like in the world, real censure came from my father. And if that's removed, I do what I want.
And how did you feel then that the way that you came to use language and the way that you saw language being used on the internet filtered back into your poetic work? Or was it all just one? Was it all difficult to separate?
It didn't begin as one, no. And this probably, so do you guys know that the last good year on the internet was 2011, right?
I did not know that.
Think about it. When was the last real good time you had?
I'm trying to think about when was it that goat got stuck on the roof?
That's recent. That's so recent. That's true. There are flashes. And I do say in How to Be Right Now that there are some days that are just pure gold. We're trying to figure out what color a dress is. Angry goat on the roof only respects one man. There's the llama race. Sometimes there are just these bright spots, and that is like it used to be, and we're like, oh, that's why I'm stuck here. That's why I'm in hell, because occasionally there's this like fun thing that happens with llamas. That's fine. But back in 2011, that's when I joined Twitter, and I sort of fell in with some comedy fuckers. Yeah, these were people largely from like Something Awful and like Fayad and a little bit of 4chan, but not as much. It was mainly like the modern tone of the internet comes from the underbelly of Something Awful. That's like something that people should know. And I sort of fell in with them just because my style dovetailed a little bit. I wasn't ever conscious of like adopting language that early to include in my poems or anything like that. What happened was that when I first joined, I had this theory about when you first join some sort of a new platform that it is a totally free space. You don't know the conventions yet. You just kind of pour yourself into it. You haven't learned the established forms. So those are the most fertile times for those places when you first join. So I was on there and I was doing all of these random things and I was looking at a lot of this funny text that I was producing and I was like, why aren't my poems funny? Like, it seems like I should be able to incorporate this in some way, right? So it became part of an active project to be like, can I integrate these two voices? Because for me it was always very like, I'm serious over here, I'm funny over here, and only in my household were the two combined. And maybe that's why I didn't do it up until recently, because that was a kind of an uncomfortable place. That was like the household voice.
It's like the most intimate.
The most intimate voice, yeah. So I had to achieve that, I think, in order to get closer to the work that I wanted to do. And for Pre-Study, it came in really handy that I had done that, because then I could do both.
And then the other thing I want to ask about in terms of the influence on your work is obviously on the one hand we have the internet and that informs the sort of humor. And then also there's your engagement with literary tradition. So obviously you read the Ode to Grecian Urn poem. There's also that amazing poem, The Father and Mother of American Titpicks, which is about Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. And then there's your essay, Is It Work? With Robert Frost appearing as a character in it.
I forgot about
Yeah, it's so great. But so there's obviously this engagement with literary tradition and like the really serious, you know, in some ways stay formal traditions of poetry, but drawing on them in a very surreal way that makes history feel like it's kind of collapsing in the poem.
Right.
And I wonder, like, how much do you feel you take from literary traditions? What do you feel your relationship is with, particularly the tradition, I guess, of American poetry?
So this is a really interesting. So you're famous for hating Yeats, like splendidly. Yes, very much. Like he's awful, terrible Yeats. But to me, here's what was true about me. Since I don't have an education, I had this like 2 square foot space in like a Walden Books or a Barnes and Noble that was like 5 guys. It was like T.S. Eliot. It was Wallace Stevens. You maybe had Marianne Moore. You maybe had Elizabeth Bishop. It was very, very, very limited. And it was very much strictly limited to modernism and what came before that. And so it was dictated to me what I had to work with. Those were the things that were on hand. You know, sometimes you'll get like a writer who, like the only book in their house is like the Bible, you know, and then they come forward and they write like the Essex Serpent or something like that, right? So, but it's taken from this book that was read to tatters in a household because you didn't have anything else. And that to me is sometimes the most interesting literature because it's these young people, you know, and they open their mouths and it's like the fonts of old, like pouring out of them. But I realized that about myself. I know that those were the people that I was not read widely or let alone diversely, that I had this very narrow range that I could draw from. And I think if you're of my particular bent of mind, which is satiric, that's going to happen eventually, yeah. But my feeling for them was never satirical, really. And maybe that is what makes, if they're good, I think it makes those poems good. I think it's because the feeling is that I love those people. You know, I love them. Like, I could never feel that way about Yeats because to us in America, Yeats was like a magic fairy man. He was like a bouncing sprite with a wand. And to us, it was like, oh my God, yes, please, more, give it to me. But he didn't have that authorial, he wasn't above us in that way. It was something that you discovered at the Barnes & Noble or at the Walden Books, and it could be very private for you. And I think that I have kept throughout my career, probably since I didn't go on to further education, that very intimate sense of just having discovered the most famous writers on the face of the planet. Being like, have you heard of Keats? I don't know. So that's still how I feel. So it's this very, like a childlike feeling that I have for them. And I think that's good for satire.
Yeah, but as you say, it's a satire of love. Like, you can feel the love for Emily Dickinson.
And for their bodies even, like when I'm writing about Robert Frost, I'm thinking about like his big rumpled pillowy face in his pictures and you know how the New England wind is like bringing his hair up over on this side. I'm thinking about those things. I have that sort of very like when you're a child, you're just studying those photos and you're forming this like intimate attachment to them. Like that's still what I have.
And I also I feel like I hear the New York school poets in your
Yes,
book.
very much so. Well done.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah.
I'm actually a Kenneth Cope person.
Okay.
Huge Kenneth Cope person.
Yeah. And I wonder then, when did you come to them, and how was it that they got sort of folded into your work?
So, Kenneth Cope was from Cincinnati, and that is also where I grew up. And when I was just fresh out of high school, maybe 18 or 19, he came to do a reading at the Cincinnati Library. And I had never gotten to see like a poetry reading before. This was like my huge, big chance. And I went there, and I asked him a question about a quote that he had given once in one of his interviews about a poem snapping shut at the end, like a box, snapping closed. I wanted to know about that for obvious reasons now, like that's what I do as well. I wanted to know about that. And then afterwards he came up to me and he said, "How do you know so much about my poetry?" And so it was just that. I mean, I was not in regular contact with these people. Right. They were like unicorns to me. And maybe the fact that he was from my very unliterary hometown made it seem something approachable. But there's something about him that is almost, it feels like his exclamation points and the German exclamation points have a lot in common to me. They're just these very exuberant, like peppery dashes at the ends of things, and he's not self-conscious about using them. And that was really important to me because you get so much stupid bullcrap about like what you're not supposed to use, which punctuation marks you're not supposed to use, what things you're not supposed to do. And it felt like here was this big balloon man who was doing all of those things, and he was feeling very free about it. And he had found a way forward, and that's what I really liked.
I want to ask about the openness and compassion that I think that you bring to the poetry and to the memoir. Many things have been written about Priest Daddy, and I know that Sheila Heti, a writer that I admire very much, described it as being an angry book. But while I was reading it, even though I felt angry sometimes about the things that were happening,
on behalf.
Yeah, it's almost like I felt I had to be angry on behalf because I didn't think there was all that much anger in the book. But again, that's a subjective reading, and I wonder, just because to me it felt like such a compassionate, empathetic work, that I wonder, did you feel that there was an anger there, or were you trying to, be sort of with your higher nature, to be empathetic, to be compassionate in the process of writing it?
This is a very good question, because I think that you are correct. I think that it maybe is more a work that induces anger in other people. And so to call it an angry book is still correct, I think, but not maybe the whole story. So the only time that I ever really got in my father's face and screamed at him, it wasn't because of me. It was because he had done something to someone else. He had just yelled at my little sister or something, and I felt very protective, and it's only something that I would have ever done on behalf of someone else. I don't know that I can really express anger on behalf of myself. So, no, that's true. And I think that maybe when you can express anger on your own behalf, you do get used to projecting yourself into the mind of the people who hurt you. I mean, you become just very good. It's this adaptive thing that women do anyway. When we read the canon, we're already projecting ourselves into the minds of, the people who have us under their boots, etc. And I just extended that to the rest of my life. But I think that you can be better than you are in your writing. I think that in Priest Daddy, I wanted to be better than I was too. You don't want to write a petty book. You want to write something that transcends in some way. And it was never for me about making fun of religion particularly, or people who were religious, because I still have that sense of the high plane. It's just the place where I want to write. That for me was the high plane. So yeah, when I go up there, I think that is what I want to be doing there.
There's a conscious effort to be better in the work.
And even through editing, to purify, right? Like the crucible of editing, you can make yourself a better person through editing. There's almost that sense. We were speaking earlier about how we're secretly fascists, personal fascists, because we want to control absolutely
Not
everything.
in our political.
But we want to control absolutely everything about what we set down and what is released about us into the world. So it can seem empathetic, but it is also me being very, very, very controlling about what people see.
But now that you're in the public eye, you can't be 100% controlling, because that's something, obviously in your poems, you have a total mastery of what you're doing. It's a performance that you lay out, you perform, and you're in control of. Whereas now, being written about, being profiled, you lose a little bit of that, maybe. You know, I feel I've lost a little bit of that, and I wonder how that feels for you, having gone through it.
Yes, well, the trick is never to read a profile of yourself or never to read an interview, because it's distancing in a weird way. And we talked about how do you feel you're described? Are you described as a novelty, do you think?
Well, I don't read them. No.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're a little bit described as a novelty. But so am I. So that is the strange thing I feel, where I'm like, my voice is being described. How dare you? You know, like they're talking about my earrings. Well, how do you know about my earrings? You know, it's a sort of thing where, again, like when we were kids, we didn't really believe that people could see us. That's the feeling you have on the internet. Nobody can see me here, so you do anything you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it can interfere with that sense of freedom, or that freedom of movement. But I forget things pretty quickly. So if I accidentally do read something, I'm generally okay again in a week or two.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
That's good. A week or two is kind of long. Can I ask how are we for time? Are we? Good. Because I want to ask about, which I think is a big one, is the relationship between writing and religion.
Yeah.
And it's something that you touch on in your poetry, I think, and in the memoir as well. Specifically, there's a point in the memoir where you talk about the Eucharist as, I'm going to quote, and I know it's awful to be quoted back to,
no,
but
because I don't really remember what I wrote.
Oh, but you'll enjoy it. It's good. You describe the Eucharist as an object that shone as the end point of so much human thought, and then you say, but it could be King Lear, because that's also such an end point. And to me, that felt like a very, like I wanted to think about that for a long time. Like I felt that gave me something, a way of placing systems of thought, which I'm sort of habitually used to as thinking of as very different, revealing them as actually having very principles in common that are intriguing and sort of revealing to me. I wonder, like, did you just happen upon that thought easily, or is that something that...
You know, that's the sort of thing I think about all the time. When I think about myself in concentration, I think of myself almost as like a beam pouring forward, like a self eternally pouring towards something. That is what thinking feels like to me. It's what worship felt like when I did that. So no, these are the natural forms of my thought. It's pretty much what I'm always thinking about. But when I was a teenager and I was really religious, it was like, well, I couldn't feel this way about anything else, could I? I mean, this is the real thing, right? But then you move on and you discover it elsewhere, or you realize that the ecstasies you feel elsewhere are part of that. Because I was always a person who was very prone to ecstasy in an insane way. You know, it's like the way I would feel it was always so clarifying, or in the sense that we talk about purification or rising above the body to a higher plane, like you would just leave. You would go straight up through the top of your head, and it's not a feeling like anything else. You don't get it with prose necessarily. It's something to do with poetry. And so I've thought about that so much, and that is a feeling that I've courted so much. I mean, you can't cause it to happen, but it does come. That I think religion prepared me for it. It gave me the language to talk about that, because above all, the language of religion is not embarrassed. And I think that it's a pitfall for our generation that when we talk about writing, we can fall into self-deprecation, or we can talk about writing in an embarrassed way, but it is not something we feel embarrassed about, not in the end. Not when we're really doing it, or we're in that place of totally pure concentration. You're not embarrassed about that. That is religious. That's how it feels.
And there's a section where I think it's a nun says to you, and for you, I think, a religious life.
Yeah.
And it feels like, oh, she was right.
Yeah.
Because at that point in the book, it's like, in a way that I can't reduce, I can't, you know, and there's no way to like summarize it down and keep the essence of what it's saying, but that there is this deep relationship between religious experience and the experience of writing, if that's the thing that you want to live your life doing.
Right. I mean, it's all meaning, right? Like this is what we're searching for. This is what we're attempting to do. We're attempting with writing to set the language down in a way that it becomes true. And when that does happen, there is a moment. It's almost like it turns to gold, or you see it happen. You see it happen when words in a particular order become true. And maybe you get a better sense of that from having heard the Bible, or from thinking about the Bible so much, and being already instructed in religious language, and in being told what to look for, that these are the things that will happen to you. This is how the sky will look, that the clouds will part, that the sun will fall down. All of these things will happen. It prepares you for the feeling when it comes.
Am I right in thinking that you have been a writer from a very young age?
Yeah.
And did you, from that young age, have the same feeling, the same conviction, this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yes. In an insane way. Again, like a totally megalomaniacal, never questioned it, never felt imposter syndrome or anything like that. Like if I go to a college or something, I'll be like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. I don't belong here. But when it came to being a writer, no, never anything like that. And maybe it's because I could call out that voice that was the voice of authority, that I think is also something I inherited from my father, that when you get into a place like this, you can speak all the way to the back of the room. I don't think that you question yourself when it's like that.
That there's an inborn sense of confidence, not necessarily in all areas of life, but in this one. Yeah.
In very, very few. Only the one area, actually just that one area. Yeah, but there it's totally pure, it's laser focused, and I don't think anyone could cause me to question it ever.
Yeah. But do you feel it when you're working? So you sit down at your laptop, or you do write longhand, I don't know.
I do this weird thing now where I write on my iPad with my finger. That's totally weird.
Oh.
I haven't always done it that way. I have traditionally been a longhand writer and then computer, but I started working on this, and so now you watch me and I'm like, it's crazy looking.
I kind of love how dainty.
I know, it is really dainty. I'm like, and then I move stuff around and I scroll, and it's really fun, yeah.
And then when you're in that, when you're like tip-tapping, is that the feeling? Even when you're moving commas and changing the word "a" to the word "the" and back again, you're possessed by that feeling all the time? Or is it some of the time, okay, it's not really coming together today. This isn't one of those days where I feel possessed by all the earth's wisdom.
On days when it's not coming together, I feel physically uncomfortable. I feel like there's like a jigsaw inside me that is just like a jumble, or that is not set right. It is a physically uncomfortable feeling, but it doesn't cause you to question. It causes me to just keep hacking until some piece falls into place. But when it's going well, it's not. I mean, there isn't even like the question of authority then. It's like seeing chess moves like 6 in advance. It's just being totally mind and feeling. It's sensation as well. But then it's total clarity, and it's also a sort of projection just a little bit into the future, where you see just exactly what you're going to do and how it is correct and what needs to be done.
And then do you force yourself to work through the times when it's not working so well, or just walk away?
Almost obsessively, yeah. It's better to walk away, just for you guys. Like, walk away. You can walk away. It's completely fine. But for me, I feel almost like itchy, or like there's a tag or something if I can't get through it to a point where I at least feel like I can pick up the next day.
Okay, so you work every day.
Well, I didn't say that.
Okay.
So I'm always, what I do, I know that there's a big debate about how often you're supposed to work. What I consider to be important is that you always remain receptive. So when you're moving through the world, when you're talking to people, that anything that you can receive the spark when it does come, where the language kinks, you pick it up and you follow it. You pay attention. It's just a sort of, have you ever watched The Wire?
Not in any great length.
Okay, well there's an excellent part in it where Bunk, one of the detectives, is at a crime scene and he talks about soft eyes. And he says that's the way, like you won't find the clue, if you're focusing really hard, you unfocus just a little bit, you have soft eyes, and you'll find it. It's like that.
Right, like negative capabilities.
Exactly. So keep soft eyes. You don't have to work every day, I don't think, but you have to remain in a place where, like, if it takes you sit down and you at least write down the note, prepare to work.
And so going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, this idea of clearing a space for yourself and being in that space, and in the essay, How Do We Write Now, there's a real sense of liberation and freedom being there. And you're particularly associated with the first book, like the book that you wrote before there was any readership, before there was any publishing industry, before there were any eyes on the work other than just yours. How does that feel now? Because it's probably impossible ever to return to that from the position that you're in. Like, there's a readership there, people are excited about your work, and you know, you have devoted fans, and like me included, and in a way, that's probably a great thing, but then in a way, is there an ambivalence there? Because it's impossible to return to the complete privacy of being alone with your work.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'll tell you, actually, you know, it's relevant to this. So I do this thing where I get drunk sometimes, and I wake up at like 4 in the morning, but I don't really want to wake up, so I go on Amazon and I download a bunch of like samples to my Kindle of books I want to read. It's like the perfect debauched thing to do, right? I'm like, I'm a little bit drunk, I'm up too early, I'm gonna, you know, catch up on my Kindle samples. Conversations with friends. It's 4 in the morning. I'm in Savannah, Georgia. My neighbor upstairs has woken me up like taking out his pug dog to go crap or whatever. And I'm like, all right, I'm up now. I'll check out this book, Conversations with Friends, and see what's going on with it. And I read 2 pages and I encountered my own name. And I was like, what in the hell? Like, what is this? And it was like this, first it was like that sort of feeling, like, oh my God. And then you're like, is that me?
No, it was different.
It was different. And then you're like, but wait, these girls are cool. I'm not cool. This is all wrong. Like, this is terrible. And then you feel like this anxiety of it. And then you're like, wait, people can see me? And you know, it's that feeling that we were talking about before, that no one can see you. So when something like that happens in a good book, which yours is a good book, it's this totally astonishing thing, and that's very nice. But yes, there's a sense then that you belong more to the world once you get out into it.
Yeah.
And then you get, what I find most is that you get too many emails. You just get too many emails.
You get so many.
I don't like emails anymore. There's just too many emails.
There are so many of them.
There are a lot of emails, yeah. Yeah, but then you go back to the time where you're like, the thing you wanted more than anything else was to be published anywhere, you know, to just like, not even to see your name, but just for a poet, just to see like that block of text. And you're like, can you go back to that moment that would have made you perfectly happy? I think that is the thing that we want to return to more than anything, is the feeling that when that comes, that will just bring absolutely perfect happiness.
But are we good? Oh yeah, we go to audience questions.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh no, I'm having great fun, and I'm excited to hear whether people in the audience have questions. I should have said at the beginning, please start thinking about questions.
Yeah, questions.
But I hope that maybe 1 or 2 of you might have, and then if you do, there's usually a few more after that. So
some people are very good at thinking.
yeah, I hope that we might have someone in the audience. So maybe if you do have a question, it would be a time to raise your hand.
Yeah, or maybe even pop up.
Oh yes, I see.
There's one. It's hard to see.
It is
a little hard
to
to see. Yeah.
Hello.
We squint.
Yeah.
I'm going to croaky voice apologies. You were talking about politics and engaging with politics in your art. And I'm just curious how you feel about the whole cancel culture thing, especially with the Liam Neeson debacle this week. And how do you feel about artists being held up as moral pillars rather than just the art being held up as cultural pieces?
So with the Liam Neeson thing, I've seen like when you don't get on Twitter for a while and you open it and then you're like, what is Liam Neeson talking about? Why is he having to apologize for wanting to murder a guy when he was on a run? And you almost work backwards from like the clues and information you receive, and then you're like, oh, that's not good. But then I was like in what is it, a Londis? Is that what they're called?
A Londis.
A Londis. Yeah. I was in a Londis, and there was like an actual newspaper that was like, Liam Neeson responds, I am not a racist. And I'm like, I really need to learn more about this story, because I don't 100% know what's going on here. I think it's easy to forget that if you do absent yourself for just a little bit from social media, then you will not know about a lot of these things. So if you're gone a week or 2, you don't know about a ton of shit. I still don't know what went down with like Kevin Hart and some of these other guys. Yeah, right, I know. So you can't totally keep up. I think generally when people say cancel culture, they're being like a little bit disingenuous, or it's like an old person like criticizing younger people for being so-called ruthless, in their social treatment of people. That doesn't mean that on the inside you don't recognize the behavior. I mean, it's absolutely happening. I'm writing a longer piece now that is about the internet, and one of the lines in it is, call-out culture. Were things rapidly approaching the point where even you would be seen as bad? So it's like, that's the tipping point, right? Like, the point where I'm seen as bad, oh, I think it's gone a little too far. like arguing. I don't get mad online. I sort of see other things come and go. And sometimes you can see when someone has just misspoken, or when you feel people have like mobbed up a little bit too much. Although sometimes you'll be a little bit generous and then it's not true.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So sometimes it is maybe better to err on the more ruthless side. But I don't know. I mean, I think it can take a lot of our energy. A thing that I'm concerned more about is like young writers who have spoken to me who are like maybe feeling a little bit of constraint in their own expression. Does this happen to you? Yeah. You'll teach people sometimes, they're like, I'm just like really worried about saying things that are bad. I don't think that's necessarily great. I'm like, well, if you're worried about it, you're probably okay. What I think about the whole thing is, I mean, as I said before, it was never a great desire of mine to be seen as a really good person. I wanted to be a saint. That's not the same thing.
No,
you do a lot of fucked up stuff and still be a saint. So that was never really one of the pillars. I think as a person who speaks very impetuously and has very little filter in what I say, the most important thing is just to get your mind right, you know? Just like, get some of the garbage out of there. And then when you open up your mouth, you don't have to be as worried about it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very very good answer.
Get the garbage out.
There's a lot of garbage in there.
There's
it needs to come out.
Maybe not as much as is in Liam Neeson.
No, probably on reflection, not.
Probably not as much.
Yeah, that was one of those stories where you see the initial headline and go, oh my god, I've clearly missed something. And
I
you
know!
haven't. It's actually
And I'm like, oh, that is that.
Yeah, that is the whole story.
Yeah,
It really is weird and disturbing as it seems. Does anyone have any other questions? I think I see someone at the front. Sorry, Maureen.
So this is also about the internet and more about Twitter specifically. When I first discovered you, I was still, when I first discovered you, I was still in academia. I'm not anymore, but I was like, okay, here's this person who is clearly brilliant, and I was very, very heavily involved in Twitter and so on. And I was like, here's this person who is clearly brilliant, who is not afraid to occasionally do things that you might describe as shitposting. And my question is there value to shitposting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, most of history is shitposting, really. When you consider, like, all of the things we've done, most of human behavior is shitposting. Yeah, no, I think so. I think, especially at the beginning, there's like a disruptive quality to shitposting that I value. I think you have to be disrupting the right things. Right, so you see, we talked a little bit about Something Awful and how it evolved differently a little bit from places like Reddit and 4chan. And it's like, why did Something Awful maybe go in a more progressive direction, and like these went in a little bit more fascist directions? Like, sort of what is that? And it's just like local culture around those places. So I think that you can be a shitposter. I think that you just need to surround yourself with people who you think are generally, you know, shitposting for the right reasons. Can we say? Yeah, I think we want to disrupt certain things. I sometimes forget that I did this, but when I wrote that article about Donald Trump for the New Republic, I took their Twitter over afterwards, I tweeted, "Fuck me, daddy," to Donald Trump. And I think about that and I'm like, what? Do that. But you know what? That sort of disruption is good. Yes, tweet that to our dictator president. Absolutely, he wasn't president then. But yes, I think that sort of thing that really shows up what is obviously like preposterous people, preposterous behavior. I think that ridicule is sometimes the only thing that can meet the ridiculous. Shitposting. Ta-da.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Two great internet-related questions. I know there were more out there. Oh yes, there's more.
It's not really a question, Patricia, but I just loved the book Free Study, and the first time I ever heard of Patricia Lockwood was when I picked up the book in the library and brought it home and read it. And so now I'm going in reverse order to your other work, but there's a little bit in the book that I just loved. My wife was out here and I was reading pieces out to her in bed at night and we were both laughing. And anybody who's read the book probably has had maybe, I'm not sure whether you have a wife in the wife side, but anyway, we've had that experience and I brought it back to our local library and I said to the librarian, fantastic book, recommended. And so she introduced it to her book club. And so I said, how's it going? She said, well, I'm at the point now where I'm reading this out to my husband at night. And so the funny piece is, but there's a piece in it, the piece where you describe when you got the word that your first book was being published. Am I right in the way?
Yeah.
And you remembered, you connected with school and the teacher telling you to take out your writing instrument. Remember that? Yeah. I'm sure you do remember it. I remember.
Actually, yeah.
That piece sticks with me so much because it was the best description of happiness that I had come across, and I read it several times. Anyway, I just want to say I love it.
No, thank you so much. That's what we were talking about when we were talking about going back to that perfect happiness. That is the feeling. I did want to set that moment down. And there's a mysterious thing that happened where like the actual email from that editor has disappeared, and it like is no trace of it, and I can't find it again. So I have to make up in my mind what it said, right? But it did. It just represented, I don't know, it was the feeling so much bigger than the body that I wanted to put it down in a little place, and I'm glad. Thank you for telling me that. That's very, very kind.
It's great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we break up? Nobody?
I feel like sometimes there's a secret question.
Yeah, there are. And then I think those are there's a secret question.
You just say it, and then it pops up. Yeah. You just have to call
there
it
is
secret.
Yep.
Hello, how do you like Dublin?
I love it so much. Okay, so here's my story about Dublin. I've been here once before, and it was during your hurricane in 2017 that I brought with me, and I had to like evacuate after a single day, so I didn't get to see anything. But this time I got to see the bog bodies. Do you guys know? The main thing that I learned about the bog bodies, the nipple thing. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The one bog body has his nipples cut off because sucking a king's nipples was a sign of submission in ancient Irish culture. Do you guys know about this?
And having learned it, I must say,
I
it's
know.
still a lost to
I don't understand it at all. I'm just like, imagine these grizzled guys with like these beards and these weird like horns on their heads. That's probably not accurate. Like just sucking a guy's nipple, and just like, how would that look? It's astonishing to me. So they cut off the nipples so that he could never be king, apparently. Which is a mean thing to do to a guy. So it's like already mean to cut off nipples, but so you can't ever be king, that's pretty bad. So in short, I love Dublin. I love it.
Well, thank you so much. So thank you for your questions. And I think we are going to be signing
we'll
books.
be signing.
Patricia is going to be signing books. So
I think you're signing was wait.
We'll have to do it together.
Yeah.
So when I know people are going to bring their questions to you later in that format, but that's fine. That's unavoidable. Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you, Coach.